Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about fitting games into your life. I'm your host, Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week, as nearly always, by my great bro host and real-life twin brother, Shane. How's it going, Shane?
It's going pretty great.
This week, we're going to be talking a little bit about a game that I have been playing a lot of lately, and that's Nidhogg. We'll dig into that in a minute, but how are things?
I guess things are going pretty well. Life here in Houston is as beautiful as ever.
We've had some beautiful weather here in sunny Mountain View, California, and my job has been a little slow this week, which has been great because for the listeners, my job is a work-from-home job, and when it's quiet, I find things to do around the house while waiting for calls to come in and answer some emails every now and then. And this week, I've found that there was a couple of good little half-hour stretches with not much going on, and I started looking for something to do. And as you may know, I'm a huge fan of retro gaming podcast, The Retronauts. They are absolutely phenomenal, and they've talked for years about a show called Game Center CX. Game Center CX is a Japanese TV show featuring a comedian named Arno. He's a sort of young, middle-agey kind of guy, very sort of typical, affable, self-effacing humor.
Is this one of these game show type shows that I've heard about?
Oh, thank God, no.
Is this going to be like an American Ninja Warrior type thing? What am I setting up for?
Not at all. Game Center CX, which I'll have some links in the show notes. There are some great places that you can watch this online today, translated into English, which is huge. But Game Center CX is a show about retro games. Basically, Arno, typical format of an episode is that Arno sits down to a challenge, a retro game challenge, where he has to complete a game within a set time period. For example, and sometimes there'll be other quirks on it. You know, he'll have to complete a game within 12 hours or 24 hours, or he'll have to complete a game and get a particular ending, or some other particular challenge. And a lot of the games are games that people in the U.S. would be familiar with, old Nintendo games, things on the Famicom. But other games are ones that you would never have seen in the U.S., and you get an interesting perspective into what types of games from Japan we didn't get here. And every one of them, Arno plays through it in a really kind of fun way. He's very self-effacing. He makes jokes as he's going. The show isn't, 12 hours long, so you're only seeing the really interesting bits, the parts where Arno got stuck, or where he has to work really hard to overcome some kind of an obstacle, and he always sort of goes at this with a really sort of can-do spirit, but he's not particularly skilled at games, so it's kind of fun watching somebody who is more or less an average gamer set a goal for himself and overcome it in every episode.
Well, I guess that's what gaming's all about, setting goals for yourself and overcoming it, like trying to play one game a week.
That is, I actually felt a lot of solidarity with Arno watching some of these. And actually, that's why I thought it would really be something that would appeal to our listeners, too. Retronauts had a really wonderful episode just about this show, where they talk about the history of the show and some of their personal history with the show. They've been watching it since it was airing in Japan and wasn't being translated into English. You can now go out on the internet and watch this fan translated and subbed, and it's much easier to get into now than it ever was before.
Is there a place on the internet that you can direct our listeners to find it?
Absolutely. I'll put a link in the show notes to the site I'm watching the show on, which is called Gaming CX. Not Game Center CX, but gamingcx.com, where they've got essentially every single episode of the show. It's been running 18 seasons.
If the title of the show is Game Center CX, what does the CX stand for?
I have no idea. And
Contest Extreme.
It very well might be something like that. But anyway, the reason that I bring it up is that I got into this show very recently, and if you're looking for an episode to pick from that long list of games that he's played,
Yeah, what would be a good place to start? Have they overlapped at all with any of your favorite games?
oh, absolutely. But the one that I watched recently that I think would be a really cool one to check out. I just finished watching the episode on Metroid, which was really good. But the one that I think I enjoyed the most was watching him play Mega Man 2, which is notoriously hard, but also notoriously short. It's been a game that has been recommended to me as a short retro game by a couple of people, including Dr. David Heineman when we had him on the show. And it's an absolute classic. It's regarded as one of the hardest of the Mega Man games. So after watching Arno complete the game, I was inspired to try it out myself, and I loaded it up in an emulator, and I've been playing through it, and it is a lot of fun. And it's also something that you really can get through pretty quickly. I've been playing it. I started playing it early this afternoon, and I've beaten 4 of the 9 bosses now, which, you know, I feel good about. You kind of have to, having watched Arno play through it kind of helped because I was prepared for some of the challenges, you know, some of the things that you just sort of have to know in advance, like, well, you should probably go for the Metal Man first because his weapon is very powerful and his level is fairly easy. So if you kill him first, you get the nice buzzsaw weapon that you can then use against later bosses. And
there was always a pattern to those Mega Man style games that was sort of the golden path through all the bosses, where each boss's weapon that you'd collect would ideally easily defeat the next level or the next boss.
Yeah, and watching Arno play the game was really helpful for that reason. But also, Arno isn't some kind of gaming genius. He'll sit there and get stuck and consult a old Japanese printed strategy guide from the 1980s when he gets stuck, or he'll ask his younger assistant directors.
Oh, so he's not like on the internet, like surfing the web while he does these challenges. He's relying only on vintage sources.
Yes, he relies
That's awesome.
on his own skills, vintage sources like strategy guides that he has brought in, and he has assistant directors who are young, more intern type people who are considerably better at games than he is. And there are occasionally times where he gets so stuck that one of them will offer to kind of jump in for a minute and try and get him past a particularly difficult challenge. And he always is very humbled by that experience. It's always really amusing. So yeah, it's great. It's such a fun show. And I can't recommend it enough. And I also can't recommend enough trying Mega Man 2. I'm considering maybe having us do an episode on it to go into it in more depth once I've had a chance to complete it. But I'm really enjoying both of those experiences, and I thought I'd talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds like something I could really enjoy. I mean, I did this summer binge watch like 3 seasons of Bar Rescue. So my bar's kind of set pretty low for reality television, and I guess I'd probably love watching somebody beat some classic video games. That would be awesome.
It's a ton of fun. What are you playing lately, Shane?
Yeah, so that definitely sounds like it's pretty cool. I have been staying up really late lately. I've had just a variety of things in my life that either kept me awake or made me want to play the night owl game a little bit. And one of the things that has been helping me with that is, or probably a cause of that, to be honest, is a game that you and I haven't really gotten to talk about, but I know that Nate and I are big fans of, and we've both talked about it. Civilization. And it's a game we've never gotten to really discuss on this show because it's the total antithesis of everything we stand for on the short game. It's an insanely long game that has no definite end point and could go on forever. But there's this Civilization Revolution sort of sub-franchise of it that I first played on the Nintendo DS and then on the PlayStation 3 and then again on iOS. And then just recently, Civilization Revolution 2, the sequel to the original iOS version, is now out. And it's really awesome, actually. And I think it's finally a Civilization that we can talk about on this show. Because
Awesome.
It's sort of like the idea behind the Revolution, Civilization Revolution, is that unlike in normal Civilization, which for the background listeners who might not be familiar, It's a game of global conquest and typically takes like 5 hours to complete. But not in the sense that it's a short game. It takes 5 hours to complete a round. And in order to experience everything the game has to offer, you'd have to play probably hundreds of rounds. The Civilization Revolution 2 is a brand new version of the fast version of Civilization, where they throw you and all of your opponents on a really tiny map, so you meet each other really early in the game, and the entire game, from like the Stone Age to nuclear annihilation in the 30,000s, is going to take place in about 2 hours of play, and so, or less if you're aggressive with it. So it's kind of a compressed version of Civilization, but it has, for me, all the fun of the full-on version of Civilization, and that's really just been sucking me in. I don't know, how open-ended a game do you think it is fair to talk about on the short game?
Well, we talked about games like FTL, and I feel like that's fairly open-ended. So yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to have to check that out this week. And one thing that I read about that, I was pretty excited hearing about it, but one thing that I read was that the Civilization Revolution 2 shipped without multiplayer built in. Is that true?
Sadly, that is true. I was really looking forward to multiplayer in this title. I think turn-based online multiplayer for this would be a really nice sweet spot. It would be something new for the Civilization franchise. Do you know if they were planning to include it? Because it seems like the sort of thing that really should have been in a version 2.
Right. I know that Civilization Revolution 1 for iOS shipped without it and then had it added in a later update. So I kind of guessed that maybe they're going that same route with the sequel, but I'm kind of surprised they decided to do that, given that it's supposed to be sort of building on that original foundation.
Yeah, see, that's funny. I played the first one, and they must have added it pretty late in the past the release of that title, because I did play it, but I don't think I ever saw the online multiplayer.
Yeah, I think they did add it pretty late, and I actually never got a chance to play the online multiplayer. I think I only played that game on my iPhone 3G, so we're talking about quite a long time ago.
Yeah, that one, by the way, that old version was a straight-up port of the Nintendo DS version, which is not to say it's a bad thing, but it's not very technically advanced. The graphics and the gameplay of the new version are really honed. It's got 3D graphics that are really attractive. A little less variety to some of the models than I would like, but everything really good.
It's good to hear it's working for you.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about it, I guess. As my 2 thumbs up, I really do hope they add multiplayer.
Cool.
So, dude, I am really excited to be talking about Nidhogg. It was a game I was really looking forward to introducing you to, and I was really glad that I got to in person on our cross-country road trip. We threw it on that laptop and had a good time in some hotel rooms.
That was an absolute blast.
And I think that it really is a neat thing, because this is a game that I feel like has to be experienced in a one-on-one versus situation.
Yeah.
A lot like we recently talked about with Towerfall.
Mm-hmm. We actually talked briefly about Nidhogg in our Towerfall episode. We mentioned it by name, although I'm not sure how much we actually said about it. But Nidhogg is a 2-player dueling game. That's the best way that I can kind of describe it.
Yeah, it's clearly a fencing simulator.
Absolutely. So true to life. So in Nidhogg, 2 players, and it's exclusively 2 players, like your typical Street Fighter type game. It's not going to allow you to do 4 players like Towerfall Ascension, although it does have a single-player mode with an AI. But Nidhogg, exclusively 2 players face each other in a pixel art arena. And the pixel art actually is a really interesting look, because it doesn't resemble the SNES sort of lineage like Towerfall does. Instead, it has a look that I think...
No, it looked a lot more like your original Atari type games. It had a kind of a lower resolution, lower bit feel with kind of characters that are a single solid color reminded me of the game Adventure.
Yeah, it looks a lot like an Intellivision game, but actually,
that's a good point.
with a kind of a different look. It looks like an Intellivision game. I'd almost kind of describe it as like seeing an Intellivision game through an Instagram filter. Like it has a kind of different overlay. It doesn't just look like a simple retro look.
Well, yeah, it's those overlays that you overlay on the television when you play your Intellivision games.
Exactly. But the other thing that really sets it apart visually is that it doesn't have the awkward blocky animation of an Intellivision game. Instead, the animation is incredibly fluid with tons of frames. I don't know what to compare the graphics in that way to, but every moment of the animation is full of character and motion, and everything looks really dynamic. Particularly the animations of the players themselves.
Another way that it's definitely unlike games of that era is the kind of fluid analog control. So on games that, when I think about games from that era, you're not thinking about something that plays with an analog stick. I just don't see how you could play this game without one.
That's really surprising because I play the game exclusively with the D-pad.
What?
Yeah, it's much more precise.
Oh, but you can kind of easily slide from between the different positions. Okay, so let's break this down. How do you play Nidhogg?
Right. So Nidhogg, each player starts with a sword, a kind of a fencing sword, and you're facing each other. And your goal, of course, is to stab the other player. And you have a very limited palette of moves that you can pull off. It's not a fighting game with a ton of combos. You can raise and lower your sword. So you have 3 levels.
Yeah, the sword is... It reminded me of kind of Joust in the way that, if you meet the player in front of you and your sword is higher, then you're scoring a touch on that player.
The game is played with a D-pad or joystick and 2 buttons. You've got a strike button that will allow you to lunge with your sword, and you've got a jump button, and the jump is very high, so you get a nice lot of altitude when you pull off a jump. So your main moves are that you can raise and lower your sword to 3 different heights. You can strike with it at any of those heights. And then there's some additional moves that you can pull off by trying some extra things. You've got a jump strike, which is a kind of a dive kick. And then there's a roll that you can pull off while crouching. So not a whole lot of moves, but you can kind of build them into a really fluid kind of back and forth.
Oh, I think there's some moves that you're missing, like the run up to your opponent and twist their head off move.
Although it's as simple as just running up to and crouching near a prone opponent and hitting the strike button. So it's not that you're really pulling off a fancy move.
It's not exactly. Well, it's kind of Mortal Kombat fatality level blood with punch out level controls.
Yeah, kind of amazing in that it's an incredibly bloody game, but also an incredibly visually simple game. Your blood is really just a few pixels scattered around the screen in the same color as your player character.
Kind of reminds me of what it's like to play games like Mortal Kombat on the SNES. You remember you could only have the no blood or like green blood. You couldn't play Mortal Kombat with the red blood on the SNES.
What a loser feature.
But yeah, the animation of the player deaths being incredibly splashy is one of the things that I really loved about the game. You are constantly clashing in this game, because one of the elements that I think really defines the challenge of the game and what kind of balances out an incredibly fast-paced and easy to screw up control scheme. It's kind of, you're running and jumping and diving and stabbing, and one touch and you explode in a fountain of gore, neon crazy trippy looking gore. And I think the thing that really makes it feel like you're able to kind of continue is not like a normal fighting game where it's like round 1 fight, 2 fight. Instead, as soon as you die, you reappear in front of your opponent. And so it's like a crazy tug of war where you are trying to get to the far end and they're trying to push you back, or like a football game where people are pushing each other forward or back across a level. The level design was fabulous.
So you don't win this game by killing your opponent. In fact, it does keep score of how many times you kill your opponent, but it's completely irrelevant to the ending of the game.
It's extremely satisfying, though.
The player who wins the game is the player who gets all the way to their opponent's side of the very long level. And you're only allowed to proceed after killing your opponent. So if you and I are at that starting point and I kill you, I get a great big arrow pointing the direction that I want to go that says go, and then I begin running in that direction. And after a very short time, usually only a few steps, my opponent will respawn in front of me, and I have to kill you again to proceed past you, or dodge or roll past you, or jump over you, or find some other way past you. And every time I go a few more steps, my opponent respawns again in front of me.
It's if your opponent gets past you, and the levels are not extremely multi-layered, but they can be. You can easily get over your opponent or around your opponent, and at that point, it's basically better just to stand still and let your opponent run onto the next screen so that you can respawn in front of them. One of the biggest pitfalls I ran into in this game was trying to chase you down after you had jumped over my head. And you can lose a huge amount of ground that way. So, Reagan, are we going to have a spoiler break before you reveal what happens at the end of this game?
I don't think so. It is in the trailer, so that's usually a good guideline for me. If it's in the trailer, I don't think it's a spoiler.
It's also in the title.
It is. So your winning condition for Nidhogg is that if you do manage to get past your opponent or kill your opponent numerous times and get to the entire opposite side of the level, the round ends when you get to the final screen and leap into the mouth of the giant evil god Nidhogg. Nidhogg is a gigantic pink worm with crazy eyes.
Yes, I in Wikipedia preparing for this episode discovered that Nidhogg is in fact a mythological creature from Norse mythology, who we're all probably pronouncing wrong because we can't speak Viking.
Yeah, bummer.
Yeah, some kind of crazy snake monster that wrapped itself around Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life, blah, blah, blah.
Etc., etc. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Oh, yeah. You're going to need that.
So this game, we've kind of described the entire game. There are 4 levels, so it's not an enormous amount of content in this game.
Nope, you've got access to all of those levels right away.
Yeah, it is all played in this 2-player versus
I didn't
mode.
unlock anything.
There are, I think, some...
Are there some unlockables?
No, there's not some unlockables, but there are some, variation modes that I didn't explore too much. Maybe we'll leave that as an exercise to the listener, but...
There's a tournament mode for if you're playing in a large group.
Super important because this game really is designed for playing in person against others. It's really... In fact, actually, we'll talk about the history of the game and its developer a little bit in a minute, but one of his stated goals for the game was to make a game that could be taken seriously in tournament play at places like EVO and other esports type tournaments. And actually, I think he's really succeeded in that goal, but we'll come back to talking about that in a minute. But the tournament mode is vital for that. It has an online play mode. I haven't heard amazing things about it because it's such a fast-paced game that latency would be a real trouble. But it is a game that you can play online against real people, or you can play it against the computer. There's a pretty decent AI that's really got some pretty good moves. It plays very realistically.
You could get 2 controllers and play it against yourself if you kind of use your feet.
You can give that a try if you like.
I mean, I'm not saying I've done it.
Okay. But it's an awesome 2-player game. So if you have a choice, this is a game to play mano a mano against somebody, and you will be hurling controllers at each other, much in the way that Towerfall is a perfect experience for 4 players all on a couch. This is a perfect experience for 2. And in some ways, I think if you've only got 2 players, this may be a better game to play than Towerfall. I like Towerfall a lot with 2 players, but I love this game 2 players.
Yeah, it really is. I guess My questions about the game. Do you think it's worth the $15 price tag? Because I feel so spoiled asking that question. But I play a lot of games that are in that price range, and this game has very little content.
I will tell you that, yes, I completely do think it's worth that $15 price tag. And the main reason is that this is a game that I have pulled out at a moment's notice numerous times. And it's a great game to, if you got somebody who's interested in playing video games with you, and you just want to play a two-player versus game, this is a game that I pull out every single time that comes up. I've been going to a lot of game meetups recently. For those listeners who may actually be in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've been recently going to a lot of meetups with a group called the South Bay Button Mashers. Great fun guys, and this game is a game that gets played at almost every single meetup of that, alongside games like Towerfall and Star Wall Just the Tip, because they are perfect, short, quick, easy to pick up games for a group, for multiplayer on a couch. And it's also great because I can just throw my laptop in my bag, grab a couple of game pads of almost any kind, and we've got a game going. Super easy to pick up and play.
That's awesome. I envy you the kind of routine experience to play Towerfall against people who like it.
Well, look for a meetup like that. There's actually a lot of those.
I should.
The game has a really neat history. It's actually kind of a surprisingly long history for a game like this. Nidhogg actually debuted under a different title several years ago. And actually, when I read about this, I realized that I've been hearing about this game for years longer than I thought I had. Nidhogg debuted at No Quarter, which is the NYU Game Center.
The Order of No Quarter?
No, it is the exhibition of No Quarter. No Quarter is the name of a arcade-style games exhibition that NYU puts on once a year, and it debuted in 2010, so 4 years ago. I'll put a link in the show notes about this, but it debuted under the name Raging Hadron, and it got some really amazing positive press at the time, but it was in a very different form then. This was one of those games that, if you were following indie gaming news, you kind of heard about this as a rumbling because it came up at this show and then was exhibited at a variety of different other game conventions and events. And every time that it showed up, reporters who attended these things would write about it with these effusive praises for the game, because it was this thing that was kind of thought of as this thing that you'd never see outside of these tiny game exhibition events.
I didn't know anything about this secret history of Nidhogg. What was it stylistically different when it was called Raging Hadron?
I think visually it was very similar, but it had a different moveset, and I think it lacked the giant worm.
Well, that was a good addition.
Yeah, the moveset's really been tweaked a lot. There's some great interviews with the developer that you can find online. About
was it always a fencing game?
It was always a fencing game, and it always was involving. It was always a two-player game with this kind of back and forth, constant respawning kind of thing. But it had a very much evolving set of moves. There were times where he added a lot of new moves and a lot of more complexity, and there were other times where he shaved it down. And this game was kind of constantly in beta for 4 years.
Wow.
Appearances were really few between that 2010 initial debut and its more recent sort of debut at EVO, the fighting games tournament or esports tournament in 2013. But it resurfaced at that point in a much more current form. And at EVO, it was played in a tournament style, and it really kind of gained a reputation as a game that could be played as an esport. It won a bunch of awards there too, and finally it was released on Steam for Windows in January of 2014. So we're talking about 2010 to 2014, this game was being workshopped, refined, and brought to gaming exhibitions and conventions and other things like that. And I think that you really see where all that time went This is a game that was meant to be perfect for in-person multiplayer, and the only way that the developer got that quite this good was to have tons of people play it in person, and have him watch those people play it so that he could refine the game again and again. Came out right around the same time as Towerfall, even though it's actually been in development for much longer.
It is an incredibly polished game, and I think the way that stands out to me the most is what you mentioned right at the top, which is the incredible smoothness of the animation, which brings me back to, I just can't believe that you're playing this game with a D-pad and not an analog stick.
Oh, it's so much better, bro. You've just, like, I don't even think that the game registers more than 4 directions.
But the raising and lowering of the sword is so much more fluid when you're using the analog stick, it feels. Like, there are so many, it's not like the typical 8-way D-pad is going to cover all of those positions, is it?
Well, it doesn't really matter which direction you raise your sword. If you've got it 10 degrees to the right or left, it's if it's above your head and then you hit that strike button, you throw the sword. Which actually, I don't know if we really mentioned the throwing the sword when we talked about the different moves, and that's key to this game.
Yeah, one of the most fun little moves. It leaves you without a sword, and now you're vulnerable.
If you hold the up button or up on your joystick, then your character holds his sword above his head, which is really interesting in that it gives the opponent kind of a key so that they can see what you're about to do, and that's really important. That's something that in some of the interviews that I read, he didn't add until fairly late. And it's a very important aspect because throwing your sword is something that players do constantly in this game. You can raise the sword above your head and then hit strike to throw the sword forward. And if you hit your opponent with it, then it's an instant kill. But they can swipe the sword out of the air, or they can jump over it or otherwise avoid it. And then you're left without a sword.
It's not hard to dodge. Now you are effed.
Yeah, but not really, because actually the melee in this game is actually pretty solid. If you can pull off a roll and get behind somebody, you can probably take them out anyway. Or you can pick up a sword that's been dropped on the ground, and after a good number of respawns, sometimes the ground is littered with swords.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
A lot of fun to throw your sword, roll, grab another sword, and strike from a different direction. You can pull this stuff off really quickly, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are some of the most satisfying moments in the game where the ground is literally nothing but like neon blood and little 2 pixel swords. Those things, it's like they're fighting with tiny toothpicks.
Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of polish that this game has that I think does make it a game that you can really consider as an esports title. But unlike most of the games that I see played in esports type environments, like StarCraft or some of the fighting games with more impenetrable movesets, like the advanced things like Street Fighter and other things like that. Mm-hmm. This is a game with a very simple moveset that is very easy to pick up. And also, if you're watching this, everything that the players are doing is totally apparent. There's no sort of
combo system or anything like that. Yeah, no, I understand.
There's nothing impenetrable about this. You can look at this game and know what is happening in an instant.
It's pure reflexes, which is what makes it both incredibly fun and incredibly hard against the right opponent.
Mm-hmm. And I think because of all that polish, it's been winning a lot of awards. This won a game design award at IndieCade 2013. It won several awards at GDC in 2011, including the Grand Prize and an Excellence in Design award. And it's got a couple of others. If you go to their website, you'll see just a gigantic banner of awards that this game has won. And I think it deserves every one.
Yeah, it's definitely, if you're looking at this game and you're considering buying it, but you don't know if you really want to pay $15 for a game with 4 levels and 1 character. It's really not like those other games that you've played. It really is incredibly unique. I think if you have the ability, especially like you're describing, Reagan, to load it up on a laptop, and I think it'll probably run on just about anything, and carry a controller to play it in person with a friend, it's going to be like any of the games that you pull out on a regular basis. It's a game that for me is about really getting together and playing with good friends, something that is incredibly competitive and is really good at even those friends that aren't super into competitive games that would maybe not sit down and play Street Fighter with you. It's so competitive and so accessible that it's basically a guaranteed fight with your best friend. And if that's worth $15 to you, then it'll be $15 well spent.
I don't even know why we're debating that, because I think this game is cheap at twice the price. This is a game that I think you'll go back to again and again and again and again and again. I've logged many hours in this game, and this is a game where each individual round takes minutes. So yeah, I think it's completely a game that you should pick up. Fortunately, it's becoming easier and easier to pick up. It came out on Steam for Windows in January, but at some point between then and now, I didn't notice it happen, but it also released a Mac version. So you can play this on a Mac now, and it will run, like Shane said, on practically anything. So load this up on your MacBook Air and you're good to go. But this has a real console feel, and that's why I'm really glad that apparently they've just recently announced that this game is coming to the PS4. We don't have an exact release date yet, but it probably won't be that long. This doesn't look like that big of a porting effort. It's a reasonably simple game, and I think it should be easy to port. That, like I know anything about that.
Reagan, is it bad that I'm considering getting a PS4 just for Towerfall and Nidhogg on my TV in the living room?
I actually think this is a huge part of Sony's strategy. They've been really smart about this. And we talked about Saeed Ahmed a little while ago. He's the sort of indie developer emissary at Sony. And I think he's doing an amazing job at positioning Sony's consoles, first the Vita and now the PS4, as the place to be for indie developers on home and portable consoles. And what I think that's really done for them is that maybe the PS4 doesn't have a huge library of big system-selling games right now, but it has a already pretty sizable and growing library of these really addictive, cool, and really inexpensive indie games that you can download for a few bucks, or maybe even get for free as a part of the PlayStation Plus program, as they did with Towerfall and with a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And I know we talked about Transistor. That's another great example. They've just done an amazing job of attracting these really compelling indie games to their platform. And it kind of rounds out those holes in their catalog and makes the PS4 feel like a really vibrant thing, even when it's brand new and there's just not that huge of a catalog of games for it yet. So I think they're being really smart there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I don't think it's crazy at all to think maybe I should buy a PS4 just to play Towerfall in the living room, because that's why they put it there.
You are right. But in the meanwhile, I think it's probably cheaper for me to keep connecting my computer to the television.
Yep, that's what I'll probably keep doing for a while now, too.
But, well, any final thoughts on this game? Because I guess I've said my piece. You should probably go buy it. Everybody out there, if you get a PS4, lucky you.
Here's what you do. Buy this game on Steam. Download it onto your laptop. Get 2 gamepads of almost any kind that will plug in over USB or connect wirelessly with your computer. Take this to a friend's house, open 2 beers, and you're going to have a fantastic time. This game is $15 on Steam, or also available on the Humble store if you want to give a portion of your money to charity. I always like to do that when possible, because the Humble store usually gives you a Steam key in addition to a DRM-free download. I don't remember if this game includes a DRM-free game copy, but good place to buy the game, and I'll have a link in the show notes for that. Coming soon to the PS4 if you have one of those, so if you prefer that, maybe hold out until that comes out. But definitely pick this game up if you enjoy multiplayer games of any kind. I think it's probably the most fun you can have with 2 people, 2 gamepads, 1 couch, that's come out of video gaming in the last 4 years.
Stabby, stabby.
Stab, stab, stab. All right. Well, we'll catch you again next week. Thanks for joining me, Shane, for this episode of The Short Game. Any closing thoughts?
Only that I played this with my wife, who is a former fencing coach, and she beat me over and over again.
Unsurprising.
But I was consoled by the memory of having beaten you over and over and over again on our trip.
We won't speak of that. All right. thanks to Shane, and join us next week for another episode of The Short Game.
This is the freaking short game, the short game. The short game, the short game.
What's
the short game theme song.
What's happening?
It's the third short game theme song. I wrote it for you.
What's happening? Awesome.
You didn't like my song? Okay,
That's
fine.
It was all right.
It was the Rugrats theme song.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.